This will be part one of a two-part video series for a tour on my backyard orchard. I'll start the tour with this tree here, which is my Starfruit tree. Last season, I harvested a fair amount of fruit off of it. All were good size and good flavor, but shortly after harvesting, I decided to transplant it to a large wooden container, the one that it's in now. And after transplanting, the leaves started to turn yellow and began to drop off. I should note that these trees are highly susceptible to chlorosis, which is a condition that causes the leaves to turn yellow and eventually start falling off. I've owned this tree for over 5 years, and it goes through this every season, especially during the cooler months. The best remedy is to treat it with some chelated iron. It can be applied by spraying a water mixture directly onto the leaves or pouring the mixture directly onto the soil. And it should be mixed at a ratio of a quarter cup to a gallon of water. Usually I only have to apply 1 or 2 treatments and it recovers. This last season though, it took much longer, and I wound up giving it about 4 applications, and I spaced them out at about 3 weeks apart. And as you can see, it has recovered nicely. Unfortunately though, it didn't set any fruit. Hopefully I'll get a harvest off of it next season though. And here's my Pakistan mulberry. I got a pretty good harvest this season, and this one has been growing in the wood container for a little over 2.5 years. It's a fairly large container. It's just under 60 gallons. And hopefully next season it'll do well again. This next one is my Avocado. I bought this tree back in May of 2017. It was a really young tree, only standing about 27 inches in height. Last season I got a good amount of avocados, but this season I didn't get any. It produced a good amount of flowers right around late February, but none of them set any fruit. I should note that last season I sprayed this tree with water and honey mixture in order to attract bees for pollination. This season, however, I decided to leave it alone and see what it would do. Well, that was a lesson learned. Although it managed to produce several flowers, I didn't get a single avocado to set. I'll be sure to spray it next season so that hopefully I can get some fruit to set. And also, if you'll note here, for whatever reason, the leader branch died back. So I'm going to have to cut the tip off and right around here and get a new leader branch to start forming. I'd like to get a little bit more height off of this tree. It's not very tall right now. It's just over 5 feet or so. I'd like to get it to get a little bit more height. And here's my Jujube tree that I have growing in a 20-gallon grow bag. I bought this tree from an online nursery a little over 2.5 years ago. Last season was the first year it produced fruit, and it did really well, putting on a very good amount of fruit. This season, though, it didn't do quite as well. It did manage to put a fair amount of fruit on, but not nearly as many as last season. And also the fruit was a little bit smaller in size, not quite as big as last year. These trees are listed as fast growing, so I'm guessing that it might be ready to be transplanted onto a larger size container. And over here is my other Jujube tree. This one is a Lee variety. It also failed to produce a big crop. Last season it did do much better. And this one is also probably ready to be transplanted. The leaves are looking a little wilted. Like most other places, we've been experiencing hotter than usual temperatures. Little watering and it'll bounce back. Hopefully this one will also do better next season, especially if I do wind up transplanting it. And here's my Australian finger lime that I bought just over 3 years ago. And as you can see, it produced a good amount of finger limes. Some of these, which are fairly good in size, it's still producing a small amount of flowers, but it's pretty much approaching the end of its flowering cycle. I recently started to harvest a few, and it's still has several that should be ready for picking within the next few weeks. And here are my lychee trees, or lychee, however you choose to pronounce it. These are the Emperor variety. These trees are fairly slow growing. They've been in the ground for just over 2 years and have put on just a little bit of growth. Last season, the one on the left produced about 25, and the other one only managed to set one. This season, neither has put on much of a crop. They both flowered, but only the one on the right managed to set any fruit, but only a couple appeared to have set. Although the other one didn't set any fruit, it did manage to put on some new growth, as you can see here. It's got a lot of new, healthy looking leaves. And next is my Kohala Longan. I planted this one in the ground in May of 2021, so it hasn't been in the ground that long. It flowered back in May, and it appears to be setting a small amount of fruit. I've never grown this variety, so I'm not familiar with the taste or the flowering cycle on these. Hopefully they'll reach full maturity and I'll be able to sample them. I'll be sure to post a flower to harvest and talk about the taste on these if and when the fruit is ready for harvest. And this is my Barbados Acerola cherry tree, which was planted in this section around March of 2021. Shortly after planting, it started to lose leaves due to transplant shock. It is doing much better and appears to have recovered. It's put on a little growth and has developed some healthy looking leaves. And it did flower back in July and September, again in September, but it failed to set any fruit. Before planting in the ground, it was growing in a 15-gallon container, and it did manage to produce a small amount of fruit, so the tree is mature enough to set fruit. Hopefully now that it's recovered, it will set some on the next flowering cycle. And next to the Barbados Acerola is my Javatekaba tree. I bought this tree a little over 6 years ago. It was only standing about 12 inches tall, and although listed as a slow-growing tree, it has put on a decent amount of growth. It was planted in this section around April of 2021, and it also went through a little bit of transplant shock, but has since recovered. This last May, it did manage to set a single fruit. It was very small in size, but it did have good flavor. I'm hoping that next season it will do a little better so I can post a flower to harvest on this one as well. And next to the Javatekaba, over in the back is my Lolita Saranam cherry. It's a little hard to see from this angle. Here's a better angle. It's also been in the ground about the same time as the Javatekaba. I did manage to get some fruit off of this one, a good amount. And I planted some of the seeds in various places in my yard, and I did manage to get several of them to sprout. I'll be planting these in a section of my yard where they'll be grown as hedge. And here's my Burgundy Plum tree, which was planted nearly 5 years ago. I just recently lightly pruned it just to control the height. Some of its branches were getting way out of reach, so I cut it down just a bit. This variety has not done as well as I had hoped. It has never set a large crop. Last year was the first time I was able to get fruit off of it, and it was only 2. And this season was a little better with 10 that managed to set. All were good and with excellent flavor, but it was a very small crop. Not sure what's going on with this one. It's always produced a really heavy set of blooms, but it just doesn't seem to be able to set any fruit, or at least a large amount of fruit. And unlike my prune tree, here are my figs that have done very well. There are 3 varieties. In the front, I have a Peter's Honey, a blackjack fig on the back left, and on the side, on the right side, there's an Excel fig. I started to pick fruit in late July, and as you can see, the Peter's Honey still has quite a bit of fruit. This other one here is an Excel fig. This tree is not nearly as big as the Peter's Honey, but it produced a fair amount of figs. Of these 3 varieties, the Peter's Honey is the one that produces the biggest crop. It also happens to be my favorite. All 3 varieties have excellent flavor, but the Peter's Honey is the one I like best. This other one over here on the other side is a blackjack fig, which produces some very good sized figs. Even these small cuttings that I started a couple of years ago also managed to produce some pretty good sized figs. I have a few more cuttings that also produced a small crop. I also have 3 other varieties that I'm growing in containers. I'll start with this one here, which is my Black Mission fig. This one has never put on a good sized crop. I've been pruning it in order to get it to branch out more. But this tree just doesn't seem to be able to set large crops. But the few that do set are fairly good size. I've had this tree for about 5 years now, and as you can see, it has put on a little growth, but not a whole lot. I'm thinking it might be ready to be moved up to a larger container. These trees are fast growing, so it may be ready to be upsized to a bigger pot. And this is my Celeste Fig tree. This tree is about 6.5 years old, and this one is a steady producer. Year after year, this one sets a large amount of fruit, and this year was no exception. And of all the varieties I have, this one is the first to start setting fruit. I started the harvest off this tree in mid-July, and with the last figs being picked somewhere around mid-August, right about the time the other varieties started to ripen. The figs off this tree have excellent flavor. However, this year I did notice that the figs were considerably smaller in size than previous years. So I'm guessing this is another one that's going to be ready to be transplanted. And this last fig tree is my Little Miss Figgy tree. This is another steady producer. It's a fairly small tree, but it does manage to set a good amount of figs. And someday I'll get around to planting this one in the ground. And here's my container grown papaya. This one was gifted to me about 5 years ago. It's been growing in this 15-gallon container for a little over a year. About 2.5 months ago, I harvested a couple of papayas off of this one. Both were excellent in flavor and good size. And it appears that there's another one that has set. It's still producing flower buds, so hopefully it might set a few more before it's done. And here is another Saranam cherry. This one has put on a good amount of growth. It put on a fair amount of fruit, but not nearly as many as the Lolita Saranam that I just showed you. Still, it's done well growing in this corner. And this is another Saranam cherry. This one just recently started to flower. It has a few scattered throughout the tree, so hopefully sometime around September or October, I should have some fruit ready for harvest. And this is my gold nugget Loquat, which has not produced any fruit. I bought it about 3 years ago and it's never flowered. Not sure what's going on with it. It's put on a good amount of growth, but no fruit so far. And here are my persimmon trees that unfortunately did not do well. This one in the front was a coffee cake persimmon. Last season I got over 40 persimmons off of this tree. This other one was a chocolate persimmon. I wound up getting about 6 or 8 off of it. Both the coffee cake and chocolate did not survive. The only one that did survive was a Fuyu Persimmon, which is on the back left. Here's a quick video of what they looked like last season. As you can see, they were all doing well. I'm not really sure what happened. Per nursery info, these are able to grow in my zone and should have done well. From past experience, I've learned that these varieties are highly susceptible to root rot, which usually happens when they're overwatered and they're in poor draining soil, which is neither the case with these. I'll likely pull these and replace them with the Fuyu variety, which seems to do well in my area. And this last group of trees here are my cherry trees. That is a mini royal on the left and a royal Lee on the right. This season was the biggest harvest off of these trees. They were planted in the ground about 2.5 years ago, and these varieties require cross-pollination in order to get a high yield. And I've also read that sometimes it may take up to 5 years before they become properly acclimated. The first season after planting, they really didn't do much and didn't do any better the second year. Now they appear to be on track to start producing some good crops because, like I said, I got a really good harvest this season. So hopefully future crops will be even bigger. Well, that will be it for part 1 of this 2-part video series. I hope you enjoyed watching, and if so, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I hope you will consider subscribing. Until next time, stay safe, grow your own, and thank you for watching.